Well, welcome to Meck's Online Campus. We are in a series on the power of one, the difference a single person can make. Last week, Jonathan laid out the case that biblically, the difference will be determined not by status, not by success, not by fame, but according to Jesus, by the degree which we selflessly serve. And it is so true. Now today, we're doing something fun. We're taking advantage of this series to hit the pause button and celebrate those around here at Meck who do just that. And it's in that spirit that today I want to use this time to introduce you to one of my biblical heroes, just hands down. The Bible introduces us to an interesting collection of people. If you've read any of it, you'll see that it's just full of personalities and characters, not all of them particularly heroic. The Bible is very real when it comes to the portrayal of people, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Last year, we even did a series called The Bad Girls of the Bible and what we can learn from their lives. But then you have the heroes, with names like Joseph and Mary and Moses and Deborah and Esther and Elijah. But I confess to having a favorite or two in the Bible's version of Cooperstown. And one of them, without a doubt, is a man named Barnabas. Now, let me just introduce you to him. You know, the first thing that's interesting about him is that he wasn't actually named Barnabas. His birth name was Joseph, and he wasn't always much of a hero. He started out as a pure business guy. We don't know all of his business dealings, but we do know that at least some of them involved investing in real estate, or at least he owned additional real estate beyond where he lived. He seemed to be good at it, meaning he would have known how to have networked and take advantage of opportunities and make deals and climb ladders, even when it meant smelling the vulnerability of those in weakened financial positions in order to capitalize on it. Joseph was a taker. He was not a giver. It was all about him. It was not about other people. But then it all changed. He encountered Jesus, and it rocked his world. Through Jesus, he was introduced to something radically new to his thinking: the power of a servant's heart, of a servant's mentality, the raw impact and life change of serving. Complete 180-degree turnaround in his thinking. He never even thought that way before. And it captivated him to such a degree that he became a follower of Jesus. And as a follower, he then saw the entire drama surrounding Jesus play out. The miracles, the healings, the teachings, the crowds, and then the arrest, the trial, the crucifixion, and then on the third day, the empty tomb. And then this thing called the church that Jesus came to establish was birthed, which was no small thing. According to Jesus, the church was to be the heart of the force of God on this planet. He wanted to change the world, and he chose to do it through the church. There was to be one place, one mission, one movement where all the energies, all the investments of God's people were to be gathered together to advance the cause of Christ. Let me read how Jesus himself described it. He said, "I will put together my church, a church so expansive with energy that not even the gates of hell will be able to keep it out." So Joseph knew that it was time for those who followed Jesus to do exactly what he said they should do, what he called them to do, what he challenged them to do, which was to become a servant and emulate the life that Jesus lived, and to do it by throwing his life into the life of the church. So with that in mind, let me read where he first enters the biblical story. All the believers were united in heart and mind, and they felt that what they owned was not their own. So they shared everything they had. The apostles testified powerfully to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's great blessing was upon them all. There were no needy people among them, because those who owned land or houses would sell them and bring the money to the apostles to give to those in need. For instance, there was Joseph, the one the apostles nicknamed Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. He was from the tribe of Levi and came from the island of Cyprus. He sold a field that he owned and brought the money to the apostles. Okay, just stop with that one scene. Walk back through that with me. It was a time of great expectation and enthusiasm in the early church. I mean, God was working. People were responding to the message. There was great growth, but it was also a time of understandable anxiety and great need. I mean, how would they make it? How would they survive? Would this thing called the church that Jesus said he came to establish even get off the ground? I get it. I've been a church planter. I planted Meck. I don't know if you know, that's how it got started. Susan and I came here in a U-Haul and then 3 kids, not even knowing where our next meal was coming from. Church planting is a time of incredible joy and unbelievable stress. And one of the biggest areas of stress is, without a doubt, financial. I mean, ministry takes money. I remember I once heard an old seminary professor say, "How much ministry can you do for $1?" And he paused for a minute and he said, $1's worth. I'll never forget that. The early church had incredible financial needs as they tried to serve widows and orphans and the hungry and the homeless, as they freed up the apostles to teach and lead full time, as they sent out missionaries to surrounding areas to spread the word of Jesus. So they had all these needs. And then in the midst of all that, Joseph sold his field. He established a spirit for the entire community by selflessly selling some of what he owned and giving the money to what the church was trying to do and to be, both in terms of its mission to reach those around them and to care for the needs of the poor. And it had such an impact that he was never known as Joseph again. He became known as Barnabas, the great encourager, the one who brought hope, confidence, courage to them all through his selfless service. Now, the fact that his gift was singled out tells us that it was probably a sizable gift, one that would have had a ripple effect through everything they were trying to do. It was a game-changing gift, a gift that very well may have single-handedly ensured the survival and vibrancy of the early church, or allowed it to break through new barriers and reaching people for Jesus. In fact, every other reference to Joseph in the Bible from this point forward doesn't say Joseph, but always refers to him by that nickname tied to the selling of that field, Barnabas, the encourager. That was the impact of following Jesus into a life of servanthood. But it wasn't a single act for Barnabas or a single season. It was a way of life. Let me take you to another scene from his life. The news of Jesus and his resurrection from the dead was spreading. People were becoming followers of Jesus left and right, even in places where there were no churches, much less pastors. All over the region, the news about Jesus was spreading like wildfire, and people were embracing the Christian faith. In our modern technology, you would say that the life and teaching of Jesus was going viral. One of those places was a city named Antioch. One of the few places where there was an established church, Jerusalem, heard that large numbers of people in Antioch had become Christ followers and that God was just doing remarkable things in their midst. But the Christians in Antioch were like a team without a coach, a group without a leader. They were infants in the faith without a single parent to care for them or to feed them or to watch over them. So what happened next? Well, let me read it. When the church in Jerusalem got wind of this, they sent Barnabas to Antioch to check out on things. As soon as he arrived, he saw that God was behind and in it all. He threw himself in with them, got behind them, urging them to stay with it the rest of their lives. He was a good man that way, enthusiastic, confident in the Holy Spirit's ways. The community grew large and strong in the Master. Barnabas was there a whole year, meeting with the church and teaching a lot of people. It was in Antioch that the disciples were, for the first time, called Christians. Okay, think that scene through. There was a need to encourage this new group of believers for them to be served at their point of need, and they sent Barnabas. But don't read that like a directive. They didn't force him to go or command him to go. The need was seen, and he raised his hand and said, pick me, pick me. And they said, okay, you're it. He said yes to the need, yes to the challenge, and threw himself into it for what ended up being an entire year of his life. Relocating there, living there, doing life there, teaching and mentoring, leading and investing, serving in any way he could. Why? Because he had already tasted what the Jesus life of serving others instead of being served was like. He knew firsthand what serving through giving had already done. It had changed his life, and it had changed the lives of others. So when the opportunity came to do more, to be in on that game even more, it was just automatic. He knew that's where his life would be most alive and would make the biggest difference. He knew that the church was the hope of the world, and that the ultimate service to it was going to involve not only his money, but his time as well. Taking what he had to give, pouring it into a local community of faith so that the kingdom of God could be expanded. And once again, just like when he sold his field, he was right in his assessment. It made an impact. In fact, it made for another name change. Did you catch it? The impact of his service was so significant that it resulted in the people of the city calling that group of believers in Antioch Christians, which means little Christs. That term had never been used of anyone before. But because of Barnabas's investment, the lives of the people were becoming so transformed into the life of Jesus and the likeness of Jesus that the only thing people knew to call them were little Jesuses, little Christs, Christians. And people who authentically follow Jesus are still called that 2,000 years later because of a man named Barnabas who lived like Jesus asked all of us to live, not to be served, but to serve and to give our lives away for others. That's just a taste of his life. Barnabas did so much more. For example, I wish I could tell you a full story on this one, but he invested in a young man named John Mark, who was almost left the ministry out of discouragement and depression. But he hung in there because Barnabas took him under his wing. And because of that, he stayed on in ministry and actually ended up being used by God to write one of the biographies of Jesus, the Gospel of Mark in the New Testament. Barnabas' willingness to serve, whether through giving of his resources, his time, his relational support, really set the early church up to do what it did, which was to explode into the world. By 100 AD, there were around 7,500 followers. By the mid-300s, there were more than 30 million who called themselves followers of Jesus. And today it is the world's largest faith. You know, I've often thought about the different things, how different things might have been if Barnabas thought a little less about others and a little more about himself. He could have easily made a case as to why it was completely financially irresponsible to sell any of his real estate holdings, to part with any of his investments, to take anything out of savings or make do with any less of his salary. If he was already a consistent giver to the church, he could have said, hey, I do my part. Why should doing more fall on me? Let somebody else step up. If he wasn't giving much of anything, he could have said, listen, money's tight. I can barely live off what I have. It looks to me like they're doing all right. Things are going okay. I need it more than they do. He could have also felt not allowed his vision to be lifted up about why it even mattered. He could have said, sure, I've got a field that I could sell, but why would I do that? What difference would that make? When it came to time, I mean, he could have easily said, listen, don't look at me. I don't have time. I work full time. I have a wife. I've got kids. There's soccer games and yard work. If I have an extra hour or two, I need it for me. Or he could have said, listen, I did my part. I paid my dues. My season is over. Let somebody else do the heavy lifting now. Or he could have said, listen, I'm going to serve, just not now. You know, I need to wait for this season when the kids are toddlers or in diapers. I need that to be over. Or I need to wait for the season when we're done with sports. Or I need to wait for the season when they're not in school anymore. Or I need to wait for that season when I'm finished putting them through college. Or I need to wait for that season when I'm done with work and I'm retired. Any season but now. But he didn't. And the world's a different place. It's different not only because of him, but because of a lot of others just like him. Which is why today it is so fun to celebrate our Barnabases. Nobody knows more than me how this church was built, family by family, life by life, through the selfless service of people. People with faces, people with names. Names like Barb Peacock, who has served as a volunteer the longest, going all the way back to our days when we met in a Hilton hotel, and she's still serving. Names like Logan Lampkins, who serves and lives the farthest away. He lives in Japan, and he serves our online campus. Names like Julie Kerr, who lives the farthest away but serves in person while serving in person. She lives in Hickory and commutes. And names like Adam Liu and Mark Wagenhofer, who together served the most this past year, at least in terms of weekend intensive serving. They served a combined 95 weekends. Names like Bill Skumaker and Bill Scherfius, who are our oldest volunteers, both of them 80 years old and going strong. Names like Sydney Martin, who's our youngest volunteer at only 10 years old, but serves on Crew, which is our worship team for Meck kids. We have so many Barnabases here. Name after name we could call out and recognize and explain what they do and why it matters. And hundreds upon hundreds on any given week serving. Barnabas isn't in the Bible because he was the greatest person who ever served the church, or because he served the church more than anyone else. He's in the Bible because God wanted us to see the power of a servant's heart, of a servant's mentality, just the raw impact and life change that comes through serving. The power of even one. And one matters. You know, one of the most tragic events in European history had to do with King Richard III's defeat at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. It was immortalized in Shakespeare's great play, The Life and Death of King Richard III. The battle was of critical importance because it would determine who would rule England. The morning of the battle, Richard sent a groom to make sure his horse was ready because he wanted to ride at the head of his troops. The blacksmith began to shoe the king's horse, but because he had already taken care of the rest of the army and all of the horses, he found out that he didn't have enough nails for all 4 shoes for the king's horse. But the king couldn't wait. The enemy was advancing. It was time to ride into war. So the blacksmith did the best he could with what he had. The armies met on the field of battle and the fighting began. Richard rode up and down the field, encouraging and challenging the men, and suddenly at a critical point in the struggle, the king saw the men falling back. So he rode up quickly so he could shore up the troops. But as he did, one of his horse's shoes fell off, the one that didn't have enough nails holding it on. The horse stumbled and fell. King Richard was thrown to the ground. The frightened animal got up, galloped away. Richard saw the battle getting away from him because his troops were without a leader and didn't know what to do. So he waved his sword in the air and uttered that famous line from Shakespeare's play, "My kingdom for a horse." But there was no horse for him. His army lost because he could not get to the heart of the battle and lead. And since that time, people have had a saying that, I don't know, maybe you've heard before, but may not have known the story behind the saying. It goes, for want of a nail, a shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, a horse was lost. For want of a horse, a battle was lost. For want of a battle, a kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a nail. Everyone who serves at Meck is like a single nail upon which the entire kingdom depends. So while we are honoring people who serve today, how can I not invite those of you who aren't into the adventure of difference making that they are experiencing? I don't know whether you're joining us online today because this is your primary campus or because it's a one-off. Maybe you're on vacation and dialing in, but if it's your primary campus, if you're an online Meck attender, you can still serve. And you need to serve. If you're a Christ follower and you want to serve others, and you consider your online campus your primary connection to the church, then consider serving this. We need people who can do graphic design, who can help with videography, who can host a chat room, who can help with the logistics of the broadcast itself, who can help with online classes and online book discussion groups, you can do any of those things, no matter where you're watching from. All you have to do is volunteer. And you can do that by emailing us, surfacing in the chat room, talking to one of our hosts or a pastor. Just raise some kind of hand. And if you live in the Charlotte area, and what we understand, about 70% of everyone who joins us online live in the Charlotte area, you can also serve in more embodied ways. Even if the online campus is your primary way of attending, you can still serve in-person services even once a month, working with guest services or Meck Kids or Meck Creative with music or film, or as a barista in the grounds on the weekends or during the week. On any given week, there are serve days where you can serve our homeless population through our partner Hope Vibes. You can work at Second Harvest Food Bank or sort food or clothes at Crisis Assistance Ministry. You can build a house for those who are homeless through Habitat for Humanity. You can visit a nursing home. You can help mentor a child in reading. Oh my goodness, you can invest in middle school students through Max Life or high school students through Real Life. We need people to join our Meck Creative team to work on producing the services themselves, from singing to dance to design to production to musicians. There are so many ways to serve. And think about just even how God uniquely made you. We'll be talking more about this in this series, but if you're a leader, lead. If you're a singer, sing. If you're a graphic artist, teacher, web designer, counselor, musician, dancer, actress, videographer, throw your hat into the ring. But most of all, regardless of skill set or lack of skill set, if you're a servant of Jesus, serve. We need the difference you can make, and you need to make a difference.